There's nothing for you to see here. Keep moving.
Excuse me. Excuse me. All right, move on. Nothing to see here. Please disperse. Nothing to see here, please. Excuse me. Excuse me. All right, move on. Nothing to see here. Please disperse. Nothing to see here, please.
Like you, be strong to hold the powers of the sun. To dream, believe.
Let's listen to Pavarotti.
Can I be your superhero?
Hello, welcome to The Revealing. I am your host, Pavarotti, and I am here to discuss the Idaho 4 case. And folks, there's some new docs that have hit the case summary, and they are so similar to some of those docs that we seen just a few weeks ago. 4 subpoenas, 2 of them duces tecum. One more than the subpoenas that were subpoenaed for the closed Frank's motion hearing that the judge clearly said was a Frank's hearing. But regardless, we're going to look into it because it means, in my humble opinion, exactly what you think it means. There is a Frank's hearing scheduled, I'm about 99.99999% sure of, which means that the judge went through all of that argument that the defense made, looked at the evidence of the argument, and concluded that there should be a Frank's hearing on the matter. So all the people out there that want to say that's just an argument, Pavarotti, yeah, it's an argument. It's an argument based on facts. And when you study the case and you see an argument based on facts, well, when you're trying to determine what truly happened, well, you should probably pay attention and you can learn what really happened in this case, not just what is going to be officially evidence. Who gives a crap what is officially evidence? We want to know what happened. And this is what happened, folks. But it's amazing to me that the mainstream media is in full panic mode right now, and as well they should be. Because as I watched a couple of clips from a couple of guilters last night and the way they tried to explain things away, I went, oh my goodness. I mean, you got to understand, it is very difficult for a calm person like myself to not get up and punch out my TV screen sometimes. Last night, I mean, I was cocked and ready, but you know, those TVs just, you know, they're a pain to take off the wall, put another one up, I have to go buy one. So, you know, I kind of refrain from, you know, inserting my fist into them, but it ain't easy. It isn't easy, as you're going to see in this one. Because we're going to look at how some of the mainstream media guilters try to spin the blood on the glove and on the handrail. And we're also going to point out a very important fact, because I've been asked many times in my videos, and up until that hearing the other day, I really couldn't answer the question. They said, well, but Pavarotti, if they've tested that blood, made STR samples, enter them into CODIS, surely your suspects were in CODIS because they're criminals. And I had a tough time with that one. I was trying to explain it away. Well, maybe they just, you know, didn't want to announce it. That isn't the case. It isn't the case. They never entered those things into CODIS. And the reason they didn't enter those things into CODIS is not what the mainstream media is spinning, I assure you, and I'm going to show you. But they never entered those things into CODIS. We know that. Bill Thompson said it, okay? Listen.
Your question there, or your assertion that we're talking about 3 potential analysis of DNA that was not provided to you, but that has no connection to Mr. Kohberger. Correct. Okay, can you respond?
Your Honor, we didn't realize it was going to be an issue today. We have given the defense everything we received from the lab. They've asked for DNA workups on other people. To the extent that they don't have them, they weren't done. They weren't done. They weren't done.
They never entered them into CODIS. Now, the reason they didn't enter them into CODIS, I have clearly stated, is because I showed you in the court docs that they didn't come up with those profiles until December the 17th. And what have we said? After the Kopaka unaliving, they got on to Kohberger. And then once they got on to Kohberger, everything else just kind of went to the wayside. We don't worry about that. We got to make this match him, figure out some other stuff to match him so we can get him arrested and get this town calmed down. That was the whole point to that. So what we're going to do in this video is first we're going to take a look at a couple of those guilters, the way they're going to try to spin this blood evidence, which is beyond me. We're going to debunk it. And then we are going to get into that case summary. I'm going to show you those subpoenas that were issued. I'm going to show you the subpoenas that were issued before the Franks hearing, or the Franks motion. Subpoenas are issued for the Franks hearing. I'm going to show you the subpoenas that were issued for the Franks motion. And then I'm going to show you the schedule of events that's already scheduled in this case. And I'm going to show you how there's no other conclusion you can come to other than it is going to be a Franks hearing. And then we'll discuss where things go after that. But first, take a listen to this crap.
I want to talk about Bryan tonight because I think there's a lot of confusion going on about the blood. If you have not heard, then, Ann Taylor brought up in one of the latest hearings that there is unknown blood, unidentifiable blood from a hand railing and a glove. That doesn't look right. DLR doesn't look right. How convenient. Because the house is gone. It would have been really nice to go back to that hand railing and establish where they're talking about. Anyway, so she goes, there's another unknown male blood found inside the house, and another male's blood sample was found on a glove that police located just outside the home. And she said this in court a few weeks ago. So Karen and I both looked at each other and went, you think that's the same glove? And we don't know. That's the bottom line. We just don't know. But now what I want to talk about tonight is this question on, let's talk about, this other, or these two other blood areas. And what does it mean when there's an unknown male blood found in the house? Well, it means a couple of things. One, it could be another person, or it could be the same person, and there's just not enough to test it for further DNA, or it's been, compromised.
Wow. Been guilting much there, Mr. McDonough? Let's address each and everything that he is bringing up and trying to spin on this DNA. 3 points that he makes. We're going to address them one by one. And let's start with this first one.
Or it could be the same person.
Not actually, buddy, because when you look in the court record, it says, to this date, the defense is unaware of what sort of testing, if any, was conducted on these samples other than the STR-DNA profiles. So we know for a fact that they did create STR-DNA profiles with that blood. Further, these 3 separate and distinct male DNA profiles were not identified through CODIS, leading to the conclusion that the profiles do not belong to Mr. Kohberger. So, they don't know if they put it through CODIS or not, but they most certainly know that they created STR DNA profiles, and they most certainly would have tried to match them to Bryan Kohberger's supposed STR DNA profile, and they didn't do that. So, no, Mr. McDonough, it could not be your first suggestion that it was Bryan Kohberger's DNA.
Or it's been, compromised.
Give the defense everything we received from the lab. They've asked for DNA workups on other people. To the extent that they don't have them, they weren't done. They weren't done. They weren't done.
Well, you hit the nail on the head there with your second choice there, guy. They were compromised. Yeah, compromised by who? Well, the only people that had their hands on them, and that was law enforcement. So by not doing anything with them, and then apparently, for all we know, they're not there anymore. They're gone. Yeah, I would say you got it right. They were compromised by the only people that can compromise them, law enforcement. Now let's listen to that other suggestion that he had.
And there's just not enough to test it.
Really? That's your expert opinion on the matter? Blood? There's just not enough to test it? You see why I have trouble not punching out my TV screen when I watch this stuff? So what you're saying there, expert, is this entire case hinges on a microscopic, minuscule sample of skin cells found on the knife sheath that they used next level science on that nobody's ever seen before. And really, we still haven't seen it because they destroyed all their work to create this magic connection to Kohberger through that. But you're saying that blood, there wasn't enough of it to test when even a microscopic piece of blood carries STR profiles. It carries everything in the genome. You're telling me they couldn't take blood and send it off and do genetic genealogy testing, but they can take a microscopic skin cell and do it when we know that a microscopic skin cell rarely is fully developed. It's always degraded. Blood's not degraded. Blood, you can go right into that nucleus and you can pull those STRs very easily. Degraded samples, usually you have to go into the mitochondria and pull a different type that matches everybody, not just the person you're looking for. But that was your professional opinion, huh? See how these people are trying to spin this stuff? Ridiculous. Guy, you should be ashamed of yourself. But that's just the first one, okay? That's one way they try to explain it away, which that one failed miserably. You got to see his comment section. He got beat up. He got beat up. Okay, so the next one, though, is even more dastardly because it kind of makes a little bit of sense unless you look further into it. Let's have a listen.
Can you help Brian and me with something here? We were all just a little kind of flummoxed by the did not meet the criteria. The 2 other blood samples, the one from the railing in the house, don't know if it's first or second floor, basement or middle floor, or third floor, or the blood in the glove found outside. What does that mean when the prosecutors might say it didn't meet the criteria to feed it into CODIS to try to match it up with other people?
Well, good to be back with you, Ashley. Hello, Brian. So here's the deal. CODIS users have to adhere to some strict eligibility guidelines before you can enter a profile. And that's because back when Congress enacted the law back in 1994 called the DNA Act, it recognized that the creation of this database would contain genetic data. So they wanted to ensure that only the genetic information from criminal perpetrators was entered. And so the evidence here must be linked to the perpetrator. So, for example, if you have a murder that takes place at a party house, that's what you correctly describe this house as, investigators could seize empty beer bottles. And if there's a DNA profile on the beer bottles and the investigators want to send it up to CODIS, they cannot. It's ineligible because although it could be linked to a perpetrator, it could just as easily be linked to someone who's uninvolved. So they want to protect those who are uninvolved. So whether it's beer bottles or whether it's gloves found outside or handrails inside the house, which may or may not be linked to the floor where the murders occurred, it's the same thing. They're not eligible to be entered into CODIS.
Now, first of all, whenever you hear something like you just heard right there, you have to be very aware of what you're listening to because this is how BS spreading works. It wasn't just the fact that he went into this spill about, well, it's got to be directly connected to the crime before they can enter it into CODIS stuff. No, you have to listen to the first part of the BS first and then dispel that before you can even get to that. Did you catch the first part of the BS? Let me show you.
Can you help Bryan and me with something here? We were all just a little kind of flummoxed by the did not meet the criteria. The two other blood samples, the one from the railing in the house, don't know if it's first or second floor, basement or middle floor, or third floor, or the blood in the glove found outside. What does that mean when the prosecutors might say it didn't meet the criteria to feed it into CODIS to try to match it up with other people?
You were flummoxed about the criteria if the prosecution states it did not meet the criteria to be entered into CODIS. Well, you're flummoxed about that. See, here's what I'm flummoxed about. I'm flummoxed about where did you get that statement? You just made it up. Nowhere in the court record does it say that the prosecution says that it didn't meet the criteria to be entered into CODIS. No documents state that. They didn't state that in the hearing. You just made that up. You just made it up. The only thing it states about those three unknown male DNAs is the truth. And you hear Bill Thompson say in the motion hearing for them, the only truth you've ever heard about it. It doesn't say anything about they didn't meet any criteria. That was a lie, and that is designed to manipulate your thoughts. Identify it when you're getting manipulated so that you don't get manipulated.
Given the defense everything we received from the lab. They've asked for DNA workups on other people. To the extent that they don't have them, they weren't done. They weren't done. They weren't done.
But it's not that BS that's dangerous. It was the other BS that is really dangerous because that is what the guilters are all going to start saying. I guarantee it.
Well, good to be back with you, Ashley. Hello, Bryan. So here's the deal. CODIS users have to adhere to some strict eligibility guidelines before you can enter a profile. And that's because back when Congress enacted the law back in 1994 called the DNA Act, it recognized that the creation of this database would contain genetic data. So they wanted to ensure that only the genetic information from criminal perpetrators was entered. And so the evidence here must be linked to the perpetrator. So, for example, if you have a murder that takes place at a party house, that's what you correctly describe this house as, investigators could seize empty beer bottles. And if there's a DNA profile on the beer bottles and the investigators want to send it up to CODIS, they cannot. It's ineligible because although it could be linked to a perpetrator, it could just as easily be linked to someone who's uninvolved. So they want to protect those who are uninvolved. So whether it's beer bottles or whether it's gloves found outside or handrails inside the house, which may or may not be linked to the floor where the murders occurred, it's the same thing. They're not eligible to be entered into CODIS.
Unfortunately, the argument that he brings up is a very subjective argument. The language around the rules of crime scene materials being entered into CODIS are very subjective. So I have deep dived it for you. And during that deep dive, I found out something else that I think you'll find really interesting that may absolutely apply to the case. And I don't know if the defense has even explored this area, but if they haven't, it's something that they really need to. Because after looking at certain facts of the case and applying it to this specific area, there may be even another area that law enforcement violated. But first, let's talk about the argument that he makes there. Let's look at the summed up guidelines on it, and then we'll discuss. So, crime scene DNA entered into CODIS must meet certain guidelines, including being from a biological sample associated with the crime. The DNA must also meet specific statistical thresholds and be entered into the correct CODIS specimen category. So they must associate the sample with the crime. We'll discuss that here in just a minute because that's where it gets really subjective. But I think this is interesting. This gives me actually more specifications of correct CODIS specimen categories that they can actually enter into CODIS. And you'll see the guidelines: the DNA must come from a biological sample associated with a crime. Well, we know the blood did. The DNA must meet specific statistical thresholds. Blood always would. The DNA must be entered into the correct CODIS specimen category we'll talk about next. And the DNA must be collected and preserved properly. Now, who knows about that one? But the CODIS specimen categories are interesting. Look at these. Forensic unknown, DNA profiles from crime scene evidence that are attributable to a perpetrator. Forensic mixture, DNA profiles from forensic samples that contain DNA from more than one source. Forensic partial, DNA profiles that contain locus or allelic dropout. That's what I've always told you about being a partial sample. But then there's this last one, forensic SDIS only. DNA profiles that are eligible for the forensic SDIS only and low copy number specimen categories. So that one is interesting. That's a whole nother category that I didn't even know existed, the forensic SDIS. And just in case you're curious, the forensic SDIS, that is the state database, not the federal CODIS database. Okay, so since that is a subjective subject, just to take his dissertation head on, I would have to believe that being subjective, when you have a crime scene that consists of 4 people who are unalived with a knife, it is almost always a certainty for when somebody's unaliving somebody with a knife for that knife to slip and cut that individual that is wielding that knife. So you would always look for blood of an assailant in an attack like that because you would expect him to be cut and bleeding. So to find blood on a handrail or blood in a glove outside, you would absolutely associate blood with that crime scene. So subjectively, yes, that would be specific to the crime. That's not like pulling DNA off of a beer bottle that may be from a innocent party goer at some party in the house. Blood from anything, because it was a knife attack and you would expect the perpetrator to be bleeding, would be easily subjectable to all of the testing for CODIS because it would be attributable to the crime. And anybody would agree with that, I would think. But it's this other part that I've discovered as I was going through looking for this information that I think is very interesting. Because when we look at the dates on, for example, the DNA on the knife sheath and when it was completed and entered into CODIS, well, it was completed and entered into CODIS on the 20th of November. Now, we got to look at all the other things that surround that. The attack happened on the 13th. It was entered into CODIS completed on the 20th. That's 7 days. Not really 7 days. You could say 6 days. But the things that surround that is the fact that the Idaho State Police Crime Lab was backed up about 3 months at the time that this happened. So they had to jump over every case to focus on this one. You have the fact that they didn't even start processing the crime scene until 4 o'clock that afternoon. So you've got collection time of the knife sheath. You have all of the processing time just to get it to the Idaho State Police lab, get the lab personnel to start even working on extracting some touch DNA samples. And then when they finally get it extracted, completing the STR profile that they said they completed, and then uploading it in the CODIS, it all seems a little bit too fast, doesn't it? Well, if it does seem a little too fast, that's because they may have used what's called rapid DNA testing. And if they did, they violated their own policy. Let's take a look. You see, this is an article from 2018 regarding police department's adoption of automated DNA testing. And you can see it says rapid DNA technology expands law enforcement's ability to test samples, but also raises privacy concerns. Now, what is rapid DNA testing? Standard DNA testing can take days or even weeks to produce results, while rapid DNA testing can generate a profile within a couple hours, making it significantly faster. Essentially, standard DNA testing can take days to weeks, whereas rapid DNA testing takes only a couple of hours. Standard DNA testing requires more manual processing steps in a lab, which can take a considerable amount of time. Rapid DNA testing, highly automated process that can be completed on a portable device, allowing much quicker results. So when we look at all the things that we just discussed as it relates to this first STR profile they developed, all indication would point to the fact that they would have had to use rapid DNA testing to produce these results, wouldn't they? Here's the problem with that. Let's read this little article right here. DNA testing on TV shows always looks fast and easy. Hardworking investigators manage to get saliva or a blood sample from a suspect, and a short time later, they know whether they caught the killer. In reality, the process has seldom worked so quickly. But thanks to a federal law adopted 2 years ago that has now taken effect, real life may start to mirror television. The Rapid DNA Act of 2017 instructs the FBI to establish standards for rapid DNA machines so that federal, state, and local police departments can upload results from these machines to a federal database of DNA samples. Although this will expand law enforcement's ability to analyze and use DNA profiles, the rapid DNA system could exacerbate existing flaws in DNA analysis that disproportionately affect people of color and put innocent people at risk of prosecution based on their DNA. The rapid DNA technology that prompted the act uses the same basic method that scientists in accredited crime labs have traditionally employed, with one key difference. It works by machine. Rapid DNA carries out a fully automated process so that after a sample is placed in the instrument, it produces a completed analysis in less than 2 hours later. One county in Pennsylvania has used rapid DNA technology to decrease the amount of time it takes to perform DNA analysis compared to sending samples to a lab, which can take up to several days to complete the analysis. The National Association of Police Organizations has praised the rapid DNA for its efficiency, saying that the law allows law enforcement to keep pace, strengthening our ability to safeguard our communities. In addition to cutting down the time necessary for testing dramatically, rapid DNA reduces the risk of contamination during analysis. Obtaining a DNA profile from a sample requires several steps to extract DNA from cells and then to amplify and process the DNA so that a computer can read the results. Traditionally, an analyst had to perform each of these steps by hand, creating the risk that analysts would accidentally introduce their own DNA. Because rapid DNA removes human involvement after insertion of the sample, it reduces the risk of contamination during the analysis process. Because a person does not need any special knowledge of DNA analysis to operate a rapid DNA instrument, however, the FBI has limited the circumstances in which law enforcement can use this technology in an effort to prevent its use in situations where samples are not appropriate for the technology. Since the creation of the nationwide database of DNA profiles, known as the Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, the FBI has set quality assurance and proficiency standards, which labs must comply with to become accredited to upload or search DNA profiles in the database. Following the passage of the Rapid DNA Act, the FBI also established prerequisites that law enforcement booking agencies must meet to use rapid DNA to create profiles to upload to CODIS. I wonder what that prerequisite is. The FBI specifies that only DNA samples from known individuals, not crime scene samples, can be analyzed with rapid DNA systems in booking situations. DNA analysis of forensic samples from crime scenes, which can be degraded and often contain the DNA of multiple people, requires subjective judgment by analysts. However, expert judgment is not as critical when analyzing a cheek swab from a recently arrested suspect. So, they can only use rapid DNA when they're taking a cheek swab of an arrested suspect. No crime scene DNA can be used in rapid DNA systems. So that means if they use that rapid DNA system on that DNA on that knife sheath, then they violated all of their policies and they could expect unpredictable results. So, Ann Taylor team, did they use rapid DNA to produce that first sample? If they did, attack, 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 attack. Well, that should dispel all of those ridiculous assertions by the mainstream media. But that also may be just another bullet for the defense's gun in this fight against injustice. And never forget that this is absolutely a fight against injustice. And there is many entities that are involved in this fight, apparently. Not just law enforcement, the government, also mainstream media, even social media. So it is a big fight, and we're up against some big folks. But it looks like at this point, they're really arming themselves with this stuff because this one has gotten away from them. And we can't let it get back in their control now that it has gotten away from them. And I'll tell you why it's gotten away from them. Because when I show you what's happening in this court case against Bryan Kohberger next, as we look at the case summary, there is no other way you can determine any other outcome. I've predicted Frank's hearings before and been wrong, so I'm scared to predict one. No, I'm not. We got a Frank's coming, folks. But that'll be video number 2 today. I'll go over all the new court docs and show you unequivocally that there is a Frank's hearing happening, and it'll probably be here in the next, I'm going to say, few days. And I'll show you why I say that in the next video. But in the meantime, please like and subscribe to the channel. Post your comments, thoughts, criticisms. And until next time, Pavarotti's out.
This is Murphy.
I told you to be quiet.
I was an ordinary boy until I broke the rules.